What's the real secret to living past 100? At 65, I've come to realize that some of the longest living people I've ever met didn't just have good genes or clean diets. They had something deeper, a reason to wake up, someone to laugh with, and a quiet faith that life, even when imperfect, is still a gift. In 2017, in Ogimi Village, Okinawa, I met a man who told me, "I don't live long to avoid death. I live long to keep tasting the soup my wife makes every Thursday." That one line taught me more than any textbook ever could. In today's longevity tale, I'll take you beyond supplements and superfoods into the hidden power of love, family, purpose, and community. I'll tell you why one man worked joyfully until 95, why a grandmother lived to 101 just to keep hosting Sunday dinners, and how we can learn to believe again. So what's the first secret to living past 100? It begins with purpose, how work, when it feeds the soul, can carry us far beyond retirement. At 65, I find myself smiling at the oddities of aging, like how my cat insists on wild-caught salmon while I'm content with miso soup and pickles. Or how my grandson thinks retired means expired. But the truth is, many of the oldest people I've known never really retired, not from life. Doctor Shigeaki Hinohara worked until 103, saying, "You're not tired because you work too much. You're tired because your work has no soul." A 2019 Blue Zone study confirms this. People with a strong sense of purpose live up to 7 years longer. He lived long because every life he touched gave meaning to his own. He believed that being useful, not just busy, was life's quiet fuel. I remember a winter when I was 38, burnt out from hospital shifts and the constant pressure to do more. One morning, I found myself staring blankly at the steam rising from a cup of barley tea. My hands were shaking. My heart wasn't tired, it was empty. That day, I didn't go to the hospital. I went to a community clinic instead. An old woman needed help filing insurance papers. A boy needed his inhaler adjusted. I spoke less, smiled more, and by evening, my hands had stopped shaking. That's when I learned being useful doesn't require applause. It only requires presence. And when you give gently, the soul refills itself quietly, like rain soaking into dry earth. So if you're wondering where to begin, don't overthink it. You don't need a new job or a grand vision. Just ask yourself, what's one thing I can do this week that makes me feel useful? Maybe it's planting herbs on your balcony, calling a neighbor who lives alone, reading to children at your local library, or writing a short letter to someone who once shaped your life. Start there. Start small, but start because usefulness, however gentle, is how the heart remembers it still matters. Mrs. Nakamoto, 91, sewed kimonos for newborns until 98, her joy undimmed. Mr. Takeda tended a shrine's moss garden for 60 years. In Texas, John, 80, volunteers at his church, serving meals to the homeless. "Every plate I hand out feels like purpose," he says. A 2019 Lancet study found that a strong sense of purpose reduces mortality risk by 20%. Their work sewing, gardening, serving deepens life. In Okinawa, retirement is rare. Elders teach, garden, or join lifelong friend groups that support each other. A 2016 Harvard study found that strong social ties can extend lifespan by 3–5 years. In 2018, at Nahasport, I met Haruto, 97, who still cleaned nets and taught boys at the docks daily. "The sea gave me life," he said. In Ohio, Mary, 85, joins her church's book club every Wednesday, discussing novels and sharing stories. "These meetings keep my mind sharp," she says. Both show the quiet dignity of staying needed, whether through teaching knots or trading book recommendations. Curious how connection adds years to life? Let's explore the community next. In a small town in Oregon, a group of retired teachers meet every Thursday to write letters to foster children. No name, no website, just a table, coffee, and kindness. In North Carolina, a church hosts a grief kitchen every week. Each potluck dish carries a memory, and each memory becomes a meal shared. You don't need to live in Okinawa to find your moai. Sometimes it's your choir, your local book club, or a neighbor who still waves when you take out the trash. How does love heal like no medicine? Let's uncover the family's power. My grandfather lived to 101 without ever stepping into a hospital. His secret? He never ate alone. Every bite carried habit, laughter, and quiet belonging. That was his rhythm. That was his strength. Sometimes I think of those dinners we used to have 3 generations, one table, the sound of chopsticks, someone always spilling tea. My grandmother would hum as she peeled apples, and my father would always ask, "Too hot?" even though it never was. I didn't realize it then, but those ordinary evenings stitched something into me, a sense of belonging. I now carry like muscle memory. And that, I believe, is why shared meals heal more than food ever can. They don't just feed the stomach. They remind the soul that it still has a seat, that it still matters to someone. Time and again, I've seen it. The longest living people weren't necessarily the healthiest eaters, but they almost never ate alone. Whether it's miso soup in Tokyo or tuna casserole over Zoom in Kansas, what feeds the spirit is being remembered at the table. In 2005, at my Tokyo clinic, I treated Mrs. Etsuko, an elderly woman who felt exhausted. Her tests were normal, but when I gently asked, "When was the last time you shared a meal with someone?" she whispered, "My birthday, 6 months ago." That told me more than any chart. We didn't prescribe medication. We connected her with a local group of women who cooked together. Her strength didn't return because of pills, but because someone remembered her name, her stories, her favorite tea. Sometimes that's the only medicine the soul truly needs. If you're eating alone most days, try this. Once a week, call someone to share a meal, even by phone. For a video meal, open FaceTime on your iPhone, tap the app, select a contact, and press the video icon. Or join a local senior group online at meetup.com by searching senior activities and signing up. Eating together, even virtually, fuels the heart in laughter, in being remembered at dinner, and if no one is free, don't retreat. Wave at a neighbor while sipping soup. Join a local community meal, or volunteer to serve one, because sometimes the table we need most is the one we help set for someone else. Mr. Raymond, 82, in Colorado, uses Alexa to play his wife's favorite jazz before breakfast. It warms the eggs, he says. To try this, say, "Alexa, play jazz," to your device. Or set up Zoom for a family chat. Download the app, click Join, and enter a meeting ID from your loved ones. Technology opens doors to love. Can faith fuel a longer life? Let's discover its hidden strength. At 65, I've come to realize that nourishment is rarely about ingredients. It's about intention. A bowl of lentils, a silent prayer, the memory of a mother's hands, that's the kind of nutrition no label can measure. Years ago, in Nara, tucked behind a bamboo grove, I met a monk who served miso soup to strangers every morning. He was 87. When I asked why, he smiled. "Feeding others is how I remember that I'm still alive." That kind of wisdom can't be measured, but you can feel it, in the presence, in the silence between bites. I used to think rituals were only for the deeply religious, for monks, for nuns, for people who owned more incense than socks. But after my wife passed, it was the smallest routines that held me together. Lighting a stick of sandalwood before tea, folding her sweater even though no one would wear it, lining up the chopsticks just right. None of it brought her back. But each act said, "I remember." And in that remembering, my grief softened. Ritual, I've come to believe, is not about belief. It's about rhythm, about telling time not by the clock, but by the quiet ways we keep love from fading. In Loma Linda, I met Ruth, a 101-year-old Adventist who hosted Sabbath dinners every Friday. She ate clean, forgave quickly, and lived with soft strength not because of a diet, but because of devotion. A patient named Satoshi never spoke of God, but bowed to his bonsai trees each morning. "They remind me to grow slowly," he said. He lived to 99. In Michigan, I once met Margaret, 89, widowed, who lights a candle each morning beside her husband's old armchair. She reads a psalm, folds his cardigan, and eats oatmeal facing the chair. "He doesn't interrupt anymore," she said, smiling. That too is a prayer. Luis, in California, plays his late mother's favorite boleros while cooking beans. It's like she's humming in the kitchen again. Their rituals aren't loud. but they're deeply alive. Whether it's a whispered chant or a morning cup of tea, the form doesn't matter. What matters is that it gives your spirit rhythm, and rhythm is how the soul remembers it still belongs. And that, my friend, is where we go next into the power of purpose born from pain. And so we arrive at one of the quietest truths. I've learned that some people don't just live long because they are held, but because they still hold on. At 65, I've stopped asking why some people live so long and started asking what they're still here for. Years ago, I met Dr. Kazuo Yamamoto at Hiroshima City Hospital. He lived to 104 not because his body was invincible, but because his purpose refused to let go. When I met him, I was a young intern, still clumsy and full of ambition. He was already in his 80s, gliding through the hospital like wind through trees. What struck me wasn't his resume, it was the reverence around him. Everyone he passed felt seen. One night, over canned coffee beside a humming vending machine, he told me why. The 6th of August, 1945, I stayed home sick. My brother didn't. The sky exploded. I found him. What was left? I buried him with my hands. That day, I made a vow to protect futures because we had none left. And he did. He built rural clinics, treated the sick, trained young doctors. Never charged a widow or a child. When asked why he still worked at 98, he simply said, "Because there are still hands I haven't held." I remember the first patient I visited after my wife passed. I almost didn't go. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, whispering her name. But then I thought of what she used to say whenever I hesitated, "Go anyway." So I did. The woman was 84, newly diagnosed with heart failure. She didn't ask about medicine. She asked if I had eaten. We shared warm barley tea in paper cups. I told her about the flowers in my wife's garden. She told me about the time she danced barefoot in the rain, and for a moment the room didn't feel like grief. It felt like something was still blooming. Since then, I've come to believe pain doesn't need to vanish for love to return. Sometimes they live together quietly in service. Every the 6th of August, he vanished to a quiet hill. To remember who I live for, he'd say, that more than medicine kept him alive. If you've carried grief for years, a loss, a silence, a goodbye you never got to say, perhaps now is the time to let it shape something new. Plant a flower in someone's name. Write a memory down and share it with a child. Build a bench. Start a small habit in honor of someone who couldn't. Healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means continuing with gentleness, with intention, with a whisper that says, "This still matters. I still matter." In Oregon, I met a woman who lost her son to a sudden illness. For months, she stopped speaking. Then she began hosting neighborhood game nights, the ones he used to love. "I couldn't save him," she said, "but I can keep joy alive for other children. That was 10 years ago. She still hosts them." Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth when pain, if transformed, creates new meaning. A UNC study found that elders with purpose after trauma had better cognition and lower mortality. Another study from psychological science found it can lower stress hormones by 20%. I've seen it myself. A widower who plants a garden in his wife's name. A father who mentors teens after losing his son. A carpenter who carves toys for children who never had one. Let me be clear, pain is not beautiful, but it can become powerful. I've seen grief turn into gardens. Regret becomes lullabies. Silence blooms into song. Pain doesn't disappear, but it can evolve if we let it. One of my favorite words is Sunagari connection, not just social, but spiritual. A tether to something beyond this moment. I once treated a man who lost everything in the Tohoku tsunami. Slowly, he began building benches along the shoreline, 137 in total, each with a name. "People need a place to sit and remember," he said. He passed at 91. His benches remain. So yes, purpose can extend life, not by adding years, but by deepening them. When you rise for something bigger than yourself, every morning becomes sacred. Every meal, a vow, every breath, a continuation of someone else's legacy. People who live with purpose don't fear death. They fear wasting life. At 65, I no longer count the years I have left. I count the hands I haven't held, the stories I still carry, the work that remains unfinished. And after all these years listening to the old, the wise, the wounded, and the quietly miraculous, I've learned that longevity is not a trophy for the strong, but a quiet reward for those who keep loving despite their losses, who keep showing up, who still believe their light is needed, even when the world has grown dark. Because in the end, it's not the years that matter. It's the people we've touched, the stories we've honored, the mornings we've chosen to rise simply because something inside us still whispered, there is more to love. So, tomorrow morning, before your feet hit the floor, pause, feel your breath. Pour tea slowly. Ask yourself, who am I still here for? Then begin not with noise, but with purpose. Gentle practices for this week. Call someone each morning to say, thank you for being in my life. Share one reason you're excited to wake up, comment below, or tell a loved one. Do one small act of kindness, no spotlight, just heart. Subscribe to join our journey of living fully. What are you living for? Let this week be your answer. Longevity is the quiet, beautiful moments when we're truly alive.